Good afternoon, everyone. It is David Schlotthauer here with another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion for Sunday, July 20th, 2025. In this update, we are still monitoring a tropical wave located roughly 50 degrees west in longitude by 10 degrees north in latitude. This is still expected to threaten some of the Lesser and Greater Antilles over the next 3 to 6 days, bringing the risk for heavy rainfall, gusty winds, and some flood concerns to some of the islands, including for Puerto Rico, as well as Hispaniola and the Dominican Republic. Now, if you haven't been here before and you do like these detailed tropical weather outlook and discussions, and you find these helpful, detailed, and informative, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that bell notification icon, hit the like button, and share this video with their family and friends on social media. Now, taking a look at our latest GOES 19 True Color Visible Satellite Imagery provided by Dr. Levi Cowan at tropicaltidbits.com. There will be a link in the description below this video where you can check these out. And what we see here on the imagery is a couple of tropical waves, lots of convection that is ongoing. With our lead tropical wave here, this has a very low chance of tropical development, but regardless of any development with this lead tropical wave that is propagating towards the west-northwest, there will be impacts to these Greater and Lesser Antilles, such as heavy rainfall, gusty winds, maybe some rough surf, maybe some flood concerns as well. But we are not anticipating any significant development, and I will show you why here in just a little bit. There's another tropical wave behind that is still entangled within the intertropical convergence zone, or the West African monsoonal trough that is draped across this area. And we'll see if that gets detached. And once that does, or if it does, this could also have a slim, very, very slim chance at tropical development. But overall, the background state is just not conducive just yet. We're almost there, but we're missing a couple of pieces, and that is still that being a lot of deep layer vertical wind shear over the Caribbean, and of course, lots of dry, stable Saharan air to the north of these tropical waves that are moving off of Africa. And you can see this by the stratocumulus cloud deck, these pearl-like clouds along to go with the Saharan dust. That's this brown beige area to the north. That is, again, warm, dry, stable air above a otherwise thermoconductive type air mass, where it's more unstable, where there's more moisture below all that drier air aloft. Here's one way to visualize it. This is a look at the Saharan air layer analysis from the University of Wisconsin. There will also be a link in the description below this video. And we can see all of this red and some pink colors indicate there is a lot of dry, stable Saharan air coming off of Africa. Not all of this is dusty, but some of it is, especially down here where I've circled in black. That's where we're seeing the most concentration of dust, but also to the north here, the air mass is also really dry, even without the dust in place. And so these waves that are down here are going to be fighting for their life because all this dust and dry air to the north. But also another negative factor in all of this will be the deep layer vertical wind shear that models continue to indicate once this wave does approach the eastern Caribbean. Right now, the environment surrounding this tropical wave is quite conducive, where we have very little in the way of vertical deep layer wind shear. That's all the green that you see here on the plot system, indicating that shear is generally favorable under about 15 knots. But as you can see here, there's this belt and wall of very strong upper level winds that are coming in out of the westerly direction in the Caribbean. And once this wave approaches that wall of high level winds on the order of about 20 to 40 knots, there's going to be a lot of deep layer vertical wind shear and some dry air being ingested into this as well. And that's going to help to result in further degradation with our wave as it approaches the eastern Caribbean. The impacts will not get erased immediately or completely, but that will help to limit on how organized this wave is able to become. One last negative factor in all of this is vorticity stretching, where we don't have a really good consolidation of low pressure yet. Let's look at the 850 millibar vorticity plot from the University of Wisconsin, same website that I showed you with the Saharan dust and the deep layer vertical wind shear. And so what we're seeing here is these yellow colors. See how this is stretched thin and even kind of wandering back here towards the east. This wave envelope is not as organized as what models were showing just a couple of days ago, how this would probably break off in time for it to develop before it runs into the belt of high level, upper level winds out of the westerly direction. And instead, right now, we're still seeing a stretched out vorticity circulation here where we have easterly winds doing this. They kind of subtle down a little bit here. Winds are rather weak here coming in out of the southwesterly direction. So at the moment, this is very well stretched thin and very elongated and disorganized. And that's going to put a lot of strain on this system, whether or not it can consolidate and close off briefly to form a tropical depression before it runs into more hostile conditions, that being deep layer vertical wind shear and dry air aloft. So this is what the GFS model is telling us as of this late morning, early afternoon, once this video is released. This is the 12Z initialization of the model. This is the American forecast system. And what we see here is, again, that stretched out vorticity. We do have better bundling right down here where we may have a consolidation locally, but the overall wave envelope is a bit disheveled. I know it sounds like it looks like it could do something, but with lots of dry air here to the north of the system, Rochambeauing our wave down here, this is not a good setup for this wave to thrive in. We were thinking that maybe the wave pocket would be a little bit more broader, a lot more moist for consolidation to initialize, but it doesn't look like that's the case in today's forecast. And so what we end up seeing here is a system that struggles to get its act together. Almost closed here, but not quite. So this remains a open wave trough that is very sharp and somewhat disorganized. Although this does not mean the impacts are going to go away as this approaches some of the greater and lesser Antilles. This means that your impacts will be more brief and not as impactful as if we were dealing with a more stronger tropical storm or a low-grade hurricane like we had with Beryl last year, where it was pretty strong as it went through some of these islands. So as we move this forward, you can see how this cross-sects Guadeloupe as well as Dominica as a open wave trough. This will bring in disturbing weather such as heavy rainfall, gusty winds. We will show you that here on the European model in just a bit. But you can see not much left of that system as it runs into the upper level westerly winds. And we can see that here looking at the 200 millibar flow plot. You can see a bit of a trough here with easterly winds here and then westerly winds rounding the base of that trough, but you can kind of demarcate where the trough kind of backs into. And so right in here, we have westerly flow scraping over the system as our wave is heading into it. So while upper level winds here are generally very light, maybe about 5 or maybe 15 knots, our wave moving underneath this pretty quickly at around 20 miles an hour will have a net result of deep layer vertical wind shear, as you can see here, of about 30 to even 40 knots, which is very, very unfavorable for this wave to thrive in. And again, you can see where that demarcated trough is actually bent all the way back into the northern Caribbean, helping to tear our system somewhat apart and keeping it disorganized. So now, how much rainfall will you see on some of the islands here like Guadeloupe, Dominica, as well as Martinique? Actually, Dominica is down here. Martinique is down here just to the south of Guadeloupe. And so you can see most of these islands here, especially on the eastern facing slopes, you could see as much as 2 to 4 inches of rainfall with localized amounts exceeding 5 inches just from a weak tropical wave that is transversing these islands. So please keep that in mind, even so that there's not going to be hurricane force winds or significant wind damage with this system. There is going to be a lot of moisture that is going to pile up with this system as it moves quickly off towards the west-northwesterly direction. Now on the leeward side of the mountains here from the European model, indicating anywhere between about a half an inch to maybe an inch and a half of rainfall is expected. So there's going to be that gradient where some locations may barely get a whole lot of rainfall on the western slopes or on the leeward side of these islands because these islands are tall and mountainous, versus on the eastern side slopes where you have orographic effects where the air is being forced up and over the tall mountain terrain here of some of these islands, and that really squeezes out all the moisture. And one other thing to note here is we did briefly talk about the winds. So even so that this is a rather weak tropical, well, this is a pretty strong tropical wave in some degree, however you want to extrapolate it. This is because, of course, there is no defined closed circulation where we have winds doing this. And in fact, all the winds are generally in this general direction, but there is going to be a pile of winds that are going to be relatively stronger than to the south. And this is where the winds are going to be located. So as this wave moves over some of these islands, you're going to have enhanced trade wind flow between winds of about 20 to 30 miles an hour, possibly locally stronger through some of the gaps here between the islands, where you might see sustained winds close to 30 miles per hour, and that's enough to bring up surf just a little bit. And in fact, speaking of surf, when we look at the Caribbean here, we can see the maximum individual wave height here, keep in mind, will be on the order here as that system passes through, up to maybe 14 to 16 feet, with an average significant wave height here of about 8 to almost 10 feet. So yeah, surf is going to be something with this system to consider if you're planning to go to the beach. Hopefully none of you are, because there will be a lot of rain, some thunder, some lightning, and also some gusty winds as well. So wait until the weather passes and then get to the beaches after that, which will more than likely be on Friday and Saturday this week. Now, zooming back out and looking at the entire Atlantic basin, the Gulf, as well as the Caribbean here, the question really remains, what goes on over here off the coast of the deep south of the United States into the northern Gulf? And secondly, what goes on more beyond this little wave that is entering the eastern Caribbean by Wednesday and Thursday? Will we see more additional tropical development? So with that being said, here's a look at the year, the GFS once again at the 850 millibar plot system. And as we can see here, while there is some back and forth between each deterministic model from the GFS here, there is definitely an area of disturbed weather that does set up shop here off the Florida coast, the Big Bend area, Pensacola, Panama City, Florida, as well as Biloxi in Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama. This is a very weak area of lower pressure. As you can see here, we're not seeing a lot of tight isobars here at 850 millibars, nor are we seeing a lot of red shading here, which would otherwise indicate lots of strong low-level spin in the atmosphere. This is a weak area of low pressure, but that again does not mean you won't see impacts here. There is still a chance that this does bring in a lot of rainfall and some flood concerns here in portions of southern Alabama, southern Mississippi, into perhaps Louisiana and southeastern Texas. And a lot of people live over here. So that is something to consider going forward when we are tracking these waves. Even so, these are not big in nature. We're not seeing a hurricane or a tropical storm out of this. This brings impacts, lots of lift in the atmosphere, moisture that gets involved, that allows to bring in the chances of lots of rainfall in the deep south. And then another area is another area of disturbed weather as well over the next 5 days. And like always, models could uptrend things very erratically with these waves or downtrend erratically at the same time. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here, because that is another area of disturbed weather coming off of Africa at a fairly low latitude, almost too low for tropical development, which tells us the background state here is just not yet ready to click for any development. But look at what happens here. Once this gets into some of the southern Leeward and Windward Islands down here near Barbados, this would be in about 7 or 8 days, would bring in another round of disturbed weather, maybe some gusty winds yet again, but it does not look like this is going to consolidate right here. Actually, it does on the GFS model, quite frankly. But it is not a closed surface flow, but it is definitely nonetheless a disturbance that we will need to watch carefully in future model runs. And then beyond that, we will just have to wait and see what happens once we go beyond the 5th of August, because it looks like things may calm down briefly before things click back into place again by the middle of August. As we can see here, things are pretty stable yet again, but again, that's not going to last for too long. With that in mind, the 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida, gives us a 10% chance of tropical development. So the chances have come down gradually with this wave envelope. But again, I want to really emphasize this does not mean your impacts are going to go away magically. There will still be impacts for these islands here in the Eastern Caribbean, such as, again, heavy rainfall, flooding, some high surf, along to go with some gusty winds. So please get prepared for some level of impacts here. We're not talking extreme or significant impacts, but we nonetheless are expecting impacts with this tropical wave as it transits the Eastern Caribbean, all right, and brings rain, wind, and storms. Now, with that all out of the way, let's take a look now at our sea surface temperature anomaly plot here from the NOAA Coral Reef Watch. Sea surface temperature for actual data as of the 19th of July. And things are beginning to click more into a more favorable configuration somewhat, though. We're not seeing a pristine look here for a very, very busy season by any means. But something that sticks out, and I've been saying this in recent videos over the last month, how we have a very, very cold PMM, which stands for Pacific Meridional Mode. We have a cold look here to the Southern Pacific Meridional Mode as well. So both of these areas are negative when it comes to sea surface temperature anomalies as a whole, with the El Nino 3 and El Nino 3.4 region also cooling down nicely thanks to very strong enhanced trade winds over the last week or two that have been plaguing this portion of the Pacific. So as a whole, the background environment here supports a rather cool INSO, a cold neutral pattern that has set up here, which means more than likely this is going to help to entice more sinking, more downward motion in the atmosphere in the deep tropics of the Central and Eastern Pacific. While in the Atlantic basin as a whole, running well above average, and that's because trade winds here have really relaxed quite dramatically over the course of about the last 2 weeks. And that has allowed the main development region here to warm up pretty quickly. In fact, so quickly now that we are getting quite close to where we were with sea surface temperature anomalies last year. We're not there yet, but we are definitely on the well above average side with sea surface temperatures here in the MDR close to 1.5 degrees above the long-term average. We are slowly beginning to erode what is left here with our Atlantic Nina. And once that goes away, we have a bit more better confidence that the background environment, the sea surface temperature configuration here, where we have a warm Iberian Peninsula current helping to feed this down here into the deep tropics with somewhat cooling subtropical region here with a very warm look here to the southwestern Atlantic, the warm Gulf and the Caribbean do support busier hurricane seasons. Now, we'll see how that plays out this year because we had something similar to this last year and it just did not get its composure together very well. We did end up being above average by 2 named storms last year, but not the hyperactive that people were thinking that would probably be the turnout from last year's hurricane season. So therefore, we will have to wait to see how this all evolves over the course of the next couple of weeks to determine if I am going to up my hurricane seasonal predictions for the August outlook that will be also released here on the channel when it comes time to that. So really quickly, looking at the actual sea surface temperatures here from Cyclonic WX. And what we have here is very warm Gulf waters, as well as the northwestern Caribbean is also very warm. We know that for a fact. Very, very warm central and southwestern Atlantic waters. Now, even so, down here, it looks cooler than average because when you look at this, you're like, man, it's only 26 degrees or 25 Celsius that far south. It's pretty typical or a little warmer than it should be because our tropical waves usually develop over here and they move in this general direction. So they're able to kind of be barricaded barely in that favorable environment, which is why systems usually don't get developing until they get to about 50 degrees west in longitude and they move generally off in this general direction. So that is what we are looking at here as of late. Sea surface temperature anomalies. Okay, we just talked about that. So we're just going to kind of skip through and go to our sea surface temperature graph here. A few basins that I wanted to show you. First of all, the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to read as I say it here, but simply the Gulf in simplistic terms. We are running about a half degree above average. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, and it's nothing like what we were seeing back in the middle to the end of May into early June. It is definitely cooler than it was back then, but still it is running far above average right here, enough to support intense or violent hurricanes. I don't like using the word violent, but we have enough heat being stored in the oceans there in the Gulf for the support of something big if it does develop, like we saw with Milton, like we saw with Helene, and other highly impactful systems like Michael. So looking at the Caribbean has also warmed up pretty nicely, and it is still on average warming up over the last couple of weeks, now running about 0.3 degrees Celsius above the long-term average. When we look at the Atlantic Main Development Region, this is also warming up very quickly on average ever since very late June into much of July so far. Water temperatures here are now about 0.4 degrees Celsius above the long-term average, which again doesn't sound like a lot, but that's extra heat being put into these oceans versus what we had back in the middle to the end of June. And last but not least, the Eastern Atlantic is also running well above average than it was literally back in the middle of May, where we were actually a 1/10 of a degree below average. Now we're literally almost a half degree above the long-term average, and this continues to warm at a very quick rate, which is a little concerning because, as you know, we have another month or so before Bill Gray would ring his bell and say, oh, this is the official start of the huge ramp up of the Atlantic hurricane season. The more active part of the season, you will, usually is on the 20th or the 21st of August. And we still have another month or so of additional warming to go. So we will see where this goes if this warming does continue upward over the next 3 to 4 weeks. But anyways, if you did find this detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion very helpful, detailed, and informative, and if you haven't been here before and you do like these updates on a daily basis, including live stream discussions on the tropics with live streams on current tropical storms or hurricanes as they make landfall, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, folks. It means a lot to me because we are very, very close to 50,000. Hit that like button if you haven't already, and also leave a comment in the section below this video. As always, have a great rest of your Sunday here on the 20th of July. I'll see you back here again tomorrow with another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion.